It wasn't supposed to end like this. That's what I kept telling myself as I stood on that porch, staring at my own suitcase like it belonged to a stranger. The November wind cut through my thin cardigan, the same one I'd worn every Thanksgiving for the past decade, because Jacob always said it made me look like a real mom. Funny how words can turn to ash in your mouth when you realize they were never true to begin with. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment I should have seen this coming, but chose instead to believe in the fantasy of family. It was 3 years ago when Jacob first brought Amanda home for dinner. She walked into my house, the house I'd spent 28 years paying off after my husband David's accident left us drowning in medical debt. And I watched her eyes sweep across the living room with the kind of calculation you see in real estate agents, not future daughters-in-law. Her smile was perfect, practiced, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. But Jacob was so happy, so desperately in love, and I was so desperately lonely after David's death that I convinced myself I was imagining things. "Mrs. Hill," she'd said, extending a hand with fingernails so perfectly manicured they looked like weapons. "Jacob has told me so much about you, about how you've sacrificed everything for him." The way she said everything should have been my first warning. It wasn't admiration in her voice. It was assessment. She was calculating exactly how much I had left to give, how much more she could extract before I ran dry. But I smiled back. I always smiled back. That's what 43 years of teaching high school English does to you. You learn to deflect cruelty with kindness, to absorb anger and transform it into patience. I'd spent decades dealing with teenagers who hated poetry until I showed them how Sylvia Plath's words could crack open their own pain, how Shakespeare understood their rage better than their own parents. I thought I could do the same with Amanda. I thought I could teach her to love me. God, I was such a fool. The wedding was beautiful. I won't lie about that. Amanda had taste, expensive taste that Jacob's salary as an IT engineer could barely afford. But she had plans, big plans, and those plans required resources. That's when the campaign began. So subtle at first, I didn't even recognize it as warfare. It started with little comments at family dinners. "Margaret, did you forget to lock the door again? You really need to be more careful at your age." I hadn't forgotten. I never forgot. But suddenly there was doubt planted in everyone's mind. My son would glance at me with concern, and I'd see it. The first seed of belief that maybe, just maybe, I was starting to slip. Then came the suggestions. "You know, Margaret, that house is so big for just you. Have you thought about downsizing? Jacob and I could really use the space for when we start a family." She said it so sweetly, so reasonably, in front of Jacob's aunt and uncle at Easter dinner. Everyone nodded along like it made perfect sense. Why would an old woman need a 4-bedroom house? Never mind that it was my house, paid for with my sweat and David's life insurance money. Never mind that every wall held memories of Jacob growing up, of David's laughter before the accident, of the life I'd built from nothing. I should have fought back then. I should have drawn the line. But I made the fatal mistake of believing that love, real, maternal, unconditional love, would be enough to protect me. When Amanda got pregnant with Emma, I saw my chance to prove my worth. I offered to help, to move into the guest room temporarily so I could be there for midnight feedings and exhausted afternoons. "Just until you get on your feet," I'd said. Jacob hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, told me I was saving their lives. What I didn't know was that I was signing my own death warrant. The first year wasn't so bad. I was useful then, necessary. Amanda would sleep through Emma's crying, and I'd be the one padding down the hallway at 2 a.m., warming bottles and singing lullabies that David used to sing to Jacob. I'd do the grocery shopping, the cooking, the endless laundry that comes with a newborn. Jacob would come home from work, exhausted, and I'd have dinner ready, the baby content, the house clean. I thought I was helping. I thought I was earning my place. But something shifted after Emma turned 1. Amanda started going to mommy groups and came back with new ideas, new attitudes. She'd talk about the other mothers, how they had their houses to themselves, how they were raising their children their way without interference from previous generations. She never said my name, but I felt it like a knife between my ribs every time. The guest room became temporary in a different way, not a generous offer anymore, but a burden they were graciously tolerating. The criticisms became sharper, more public. At Emma's first birthday party, surrounded by Amanda's friends from her mommy group, she announced loudly, "Thank goodness we have Margaret here. She's like a live-in babysitter, except we don't have to pay her." Everyone laughed. It was supposed to be a joke, but I saw the looks exchanged between the other women, the subtle nods of approval. In one sentence, she'd reduced 43 years of teaching, of raising my own son alone, of building a life from ruins, to nothing more than free domestic labor. Jacob said nothing. He never said anything anymore. When had my son become so silent? When had the boy who used to defend me against playground bullies learned to look away when his own wife humiliated me? I watched him laugh along with her joke, watched him avoid my eyes, and something inside me began to harden. Not into anger, not yet, into understanding. The day Emma got sick was the day I truly understood what I was dealing with. It was a Saturday morning, and Emma had been crying all night with a fever. I'd told Amanda we needed to take her to the doctor, that 102 degrees in a toddler wasn't something to ignore. But Amanda had plans, brunch with her mommy group, some kind of networking event for her consulting business that never seemed to actually make any money. "She's fine, Margaret. Kids get fevers. Stop being so dramatic." But I knew. 43 years of teaching meant 43 years of watching children, of learning to read the signs when something was seriously wrong. Emma's cry was different, desperate, and her little body was burning up despite the medicine. So I did what any grandmother would do. I called Jacob at work, told him to come home immediately. He arrived to find me in the car with Emma, ready to go to urgent care. Amanda was furious, not because Emma was sick, but because I'd overstepped by calling Jacob, by making decisions above my station, as she put it later. Emma had an ear infection that was close to becoming something worse. The doctor said if we'd waited another day, she might have needed hospitalization. I thought surely this would wake Jacob up, would make him see what was happening in his own home. Instead, Amanda used it as ammunition. Within a week, she'd spun the story to her mommy group, to our neighbours, to anyone who would listen. Margaret was becoming anxious and paranoid, seeing crises where none existed, undermining Amanda's parenting decisions. She even started a little journal, I found it later, documenting my concerning behaviours. Margaret forgot to turn off the stove. Margaret couldn't remember where she put her keys. Margaret got confused about what day it was. All lies, meticulously crafted, building a case for my incompetence. But here's what Amanda didn't know. I'd been a teacher for 4 decades. I knew how to document too. Every time she made a claim, I made a note, with dates, with witnesses when possible, with evidence to the contrary. When she said I'd left the stove on, I had a photo of the kitchen from that morning, everything off, everything clean. When she said I was forgetting things, I had my daily planner, filled out meticulously as it had been for 40 years. I wasn't fighting back yet, but I was preparing. The final months in that house were a masterclass in psychological warfare, and Amanda was a natural strategist. She started limiting my access to Emma, saying I was too old to safely watch her alone. She rearranged the furniture in my room, the guest room that had somehow become my room permanently, moving things just enough that I'd bump into them, then expressing concern about my spatial awareness. She intercepted my mail, including financial statements and letters from my retirement fund. She even started spreading rumors at the local community center where I volunteered, suggesting I was showing early signs of dementia. But the cruelest cut came 3 months before Thanksgiving. I'd been teaching Emma to read, the same way I'd taught thousands of children over my career. She was bright, curious, soaking up words like a sponge. One afternoon, Amanda found us curled up on the couch with "Where the Wild Things Are," Emma sounding out the words with fierce concentration. I looked up to see Amanda in the doorway, and the expression on her face was something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not irritation, but pure, cold calculation. "Emma, sweetheart, go play in your room," she said, her voice sticky sweet. Then she turned to me, and the sweetness vanished. "We need to talk about your living situation, Margaret." She had brochures, actual glossy brochures for nursing homes and assisted living facilities, spread out on the kitchen table like real estate listings. "I've been doing research," she said, as if she were presenting a school project. "There are some really nice facilities in the area, places where you'd have people your own age, activities, proper care." "I don't need care," I said quietly. "I'm 66, not 96. "But you're getting older, Margaret. And with your episodes, it's becoming a safety concern, for Emma especially. What if something happened while you were watching her?" There it was, the threat wrapped in concern. "Give up your home, let us put you away, or we'll use your granddaughter as leverage." I looked at those brochures and realized this had been the plan all along. Get me to move in, establish me as dependent, document my decline, and then ship me off to die slowly in some sterile facility while they took over the house I'd spent 3 decades building. That night, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Maplewood Apartments, a quiet complex near the library where I'd volunteered for years. They had a 1-bedroom available immediately. The second was to my lawyer, Tom Richardson, who'd handled my will after David died. I told him I needed to review some documents, make some changes, ensure certain protections were in place. The third was to my bank, to confirm something I'd suspected for months. What I found shouldn't have surprised me, but it still took my breath away. There were charges on David's old credit card, the one I'd kept active in his name for emergencies, dating back 18 months. Thousands of dollars in luxury purchases, spa treatments, designer clothes, all charged to an account that should have been frozen. Someone had been using his identity, forging signatures, committing fraud in the name of my dead husband. And there was only one person with access to my files, my documents, my private information. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I just documented everything, photographed every statement, every signature that was clearly not mine or David's. I built my case the way I'd built my career, with patience, with precision, with the understanding that the truth, when revealed at the right moment, is more powerful than any argument. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were strange. I moved through that house like a ghost, watching Amanda play her role of concerned daughter-in-law, watching Jacob avoid any real conversation, watching Emma grow and learn and love me without knowing she was being used as a weapon. I served dinner, I did laundry, I smiled at the right moments, but inside, I was counting down, not to my defeat, but to my liberation. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and grey, matching my mood perfectly. Amanda had announced she wanted Thanksgiving to be just our little family this year, meaning I wasn't invited to the actual dinner. Instead, I'd volunteered at the church kitchen, serving turkey and stuffing to people who had nowhere else to go. It seemed fitting somehow. I was surrounded by strangers who were grateful for my presence, while my own family was preparing to erase me entirely. When I came home at 9 p.m., exhausted and smelling of gravy, I saw it immediately. My suitcase, the old blue one I'd bought for a teaching conference in 1985, sitting on the porch like trash waiting for collection. The note was taped to the handle, and I could see Amanda's perfect handwriting even in the dim porch light. "If you want to stay, the basement's available. We'll discuss rent later. Your daughter-in-law." Not Jacob, not my son, just your daughter-in-law. As if this were a business transaction. As if the 43 years I'd spent building this life meant nothing more than a rental agreement gone sour. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, and I felt something shift inside me. Not breaking. I'd been broken before and survived. No, this was different. This was crystallization, like carbon transforming under pressure into diamond, hard, clear, unbreakable. I picked up my suitcase, not because I was accepting their terms, but because I was done playing their game. Through the window, I could see them at the dinner table, Jacob, Amanda, and Emma, framed like a perfect family portrait. They looked complete without me, and maybe that was the point. Maybe I'd always been the extra piece that didn't fit their picture. But as I turned away, pulling out my phone to call the taxi I'd already scheduled for this exact moment, I smiled. Because they'd made one fatal mistake. They'd assumed I was weak. They'd assumed I was alone. They'd assumed I had nowhere to go and no way to fight back. They'd forgotten I was a teacher, and teachers always have a lesson plan. The taxi driver didn't ask questions, which I appreciated. He just loaded my suitcase into the trunk and drove through streets I'd known for 40 years, streets that suddenly felt like foreign territory. Maplewood Apartments sat on a quiet street near the old Carnegie Library, where I'd spent countless Saturdays helping immigrants learn English and teaching book clubs to discuss everything from Toni Morrison to Gabriel Garcia Marquez. The building wasn't fancy. Red brick, slightly worn, with fire escapes that zigzagged down like iron veins. But it was mine. I'd signed the lease 2 weeks earlier, using money from an account Amanda didn't know existed, one I'd opened the day David died with his life insurance money that I'd never touched. Emergency fund, I'd called it then. Escape fund, it turned out to be now. The apartment was small. Bedroom, living room, kitchen, bathroom. But it had something my son's house hadn't had in years. Silence that felt like peace instead of abandonment. I spent that first night unpacking the few things in my suitcase, hanging my clothes in a closet that was mine alone, making tea in a kitchen where no one would criticize how I boiled water or mock me for forgetting to use the right mug. I sat by the window, looking out at the street below, and for the first time in 3 years, I could breathe without waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I wasn't here to hide. I was here to build. The next morning, I walked to the library as I did every Saturday, as I'd done for the past 15 years. Sandra, the head librarian, looked up from her desk with genuine surprise. "Margaret, I thought you'd be with your family today, recovering from Thanksgiving." "Change of plans," I said, keeping my voice light. Actually, I was hoping to use one of the computers. Mine's been acting up. A small lie, but necessary. I needed to access my email, my bank accounts, my documentation without any possibility of Amanda monitoring what I was doing. At Jacob's house, I'd learned the hard way that privacy was an illusion. Amanda had access to the Wi-Fi router, could see every website I visited, every email I sent. Here, on the library's network, I was invisible. I spent 3 hours that morning organizing everything I'd collected over the past few months. Every fraudulent charge on David's credit card, meticulously documented with dates and amounts. Every entry in Amanda's journal of my supposed incidents, each one contradicted by my own records. Photos, receipts, dated planner entries. The nursing home brochures she'd shown me, which I'd photographed with my phone. Text messages she'd sent to her mother. I'd seen them when she left her phone on the kitchen counter, discussing how they were going to handle the Margaret situation and how much money they'd make once they got control of her assets. But the piece de resistance, the thing I'd discovered just last week, was the power of attorney document. Amanda had forged it, using my signature from an old check and David's notary stamp that he'd kept from his days handling estate paperwork before the accident. With this document, she could make medical decisions for me, financial decisions, could commit me to a facility against my will if she could prove I was mentally incompetent. And she'd been building that case for months, with her fake journal entries and her whisper campaign to neighbors and friends. The problem with Amanda's plan was that she'd underestimated two things: my intelligence and my patience. She'd assumed that because I was a high school English teacher, I knew nothing about law or finance or strategic planning. But what she didn't know was that I'd spent 4 decades not just teaching Shakespeare and poetry, but serving on school boards, navigating district politics, fighting budget cuts and curriculum challenges. I'd learned how to play the long game, how to build coalitions, how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. I created a folder on the library computer, password protected, uploaded every piece of evidence I had. Then I sent a carefully worded email to Tom Richardson, my lawyer, with a subject line that would get his attention. Urgent. Elder fraud and identity theft documentation. I didn't explain everything. Not yet. I just told him I needed to meet as soon as possible, that I had evidence of serious financial crimes, and that I needed his help protecting myself legally. His response came within an hour. My office, Monday morning, 9 a.m. Bring everything. The weekend passed in strange suspension. I didn't hear from Jacob, which didn't surprise me. Amanda had probably spun some story about how I'd overreacted to a reasonable request, how I'd become difficult and emotional. She was good at that, turning my legitimate grievances into symptoms of decline. I wondered if Jacob believed her completely, or if some small part of him felt guilty. Then I decided I didn't care. The son I'd raised, the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them roses, would have fought for me. This man, who'd stood silent while his wife threw me out, I didn't know him anymore. On Saturday afternoon, I did something I should have done months ago. I called the Social Security Administration's fraud hotline and reported the identity theft. The agent was professional, efficient, and horrified when I explained that someone had been using my deceased husband's identity to make purchases. "Ma'am, this is a federal crime. We'll need you to file a formal report, and we'll be opening an investigation." "I understand," I said. "I have documentation, 18 months' worth." "You've been tracking this for 18 months?" Her tone shifted from professional to impressed. "I'm a teacher," I said simply. "Documentation is what we do." Sunday morning, I attended services at St. Catherine's, the small Episcopal church where I'd been a member for 30 years. Father Michael did a double-take when he saw me sitting alone in my usual pew, the spot where I used to sit with David, and then later with Jacob. After the service, he caught my arm gently. "Margaret, I expected to see you with your family today. Is everything all right?" I could have lied. Should have lied, probably. But Father Michael had buried my husband, had counseled me through grief, had watched me rebuild my life from ashes. He deserved the truth. "I've moved out," I said quietly, "into Maplewood Apartments. It's complicated." His weathered face creased with concern. "Do you need help? The church has resources." "I don't need charity, Father, but I might need a witness, if you're willing." He studied me carefully, and I saw the moment he understood that this wasn't about victimhood or plea for rescue. This was about justice. "Whatever you need, Margaret. You've given enough to this community. It's time someone gave back to you." "Just your observations," I said. "About my mental state, my capabilities. In writing, if possible. Dated and signed." He nodded slowly. "Consider it done. And Margaret, whatever you're planning, be careful. But also, be fierce. Sometimes the meek don't inherit the earth. Sometimes they get buried under it." Monday morning arrived with frost on the windows and clarity in my mind. Tom Richardson's office was downtown, in one of those old buildings that had been converted from Victorian mansion to law offices. I'd been here before, after David's accident, after his death, signing papers and making arrangements I'd hoped would protect my future. Now I was here to protect myself from the very family I'd been trying to shelter. Tom was waiting for me. Coffee already poured, legal pads at the ready. He'd been David's college roommate, had been at our wedding, had watched Jacob grow up. When I walked in carrying my folder of evidence, his expression was already grim. "Margaret, whatever this is, I'm going to help you. But you need to tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the slow erosion of respect, the escalation of control, the false documentation of incompetence. I showed him Amanda's journal and my contradictory evidence. I showed him the credit card fraud, the forged power of attorney, the nursing home plans. And I showed him something I'd been saving, something I'd discovered purely by accident 2 months ago. Amanda wasn't just living beyond their means. She'd taken out loans in Jacob's name, loans he didn't know about, using his financial information and forging his signature. She'd racked up nearly $50,000 in debt, all while maintaining the facade of a perfect suburban housewife. Tom's face grew darker with each revelation. "Margaret, Jesus Christ, this is a criminal enterprise. She's not just being cruel, she's systematically defrauding you, your son, even the credit card companies. And this power of attorney..." He held up the forged document. "If she'd succeeded in using this, she could have had you committed, sold your house, taken everything." "I know," I said calmly. "That's why I need you to help me make sure she can't." "What do you want to do?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment. This was where I either retreated into victimhood or stepped forward into my own power. "I want to file a police report for identity theft and fraud. I want to file for a restraining order to keep her away from my finances. I want to ensure that if Jacob divorces her, he has full custody of Emma. And I want to make sure that every person who believed her lies about me knows the truth." Tom leaned back in his chair. "That's not revenge, Margaret. That's scorched earth." "No," I corrected him. "Revenge would be trying to destroy her life. I'm just stopping her from destroying mine, and my son's, and my granddaughter's. Everything else is just consequences." He smiled then, a slow smile that reminded me why David had trusted him with everything. "All right then, let's build your case." We spent the next 4 hours going through everything methodically. Tom drafted documents, made phone calls, scheduled appointments with the police department's fraud division and with adult protective services. He contacted the credit card companies with evidence of identity theft. He prepared a cease and desist letter regarding the forged power of attorney, with copies going to every major hospital and care facility in the area to ensure Amanda couldn't use it. And he helped me file for a protective order, not physical protection, but financial, barring Amanda from accessing any accounts or property in my name. "This is going to explode," Tom warned me as I prepared to leave. "Once these reports are filed, once these letters go out, Amanda is going to realize she's trapped. She'll lash out. She'll try to turn Jacob against you completely. She might even try to use Emma as leverage." "Let her try," I said, and I meant it. "I've been documenting everything, Tom. Every conversation, every interaction. I have witnesses now. You, Father Michael, Sandra at the library. I have evidence that speaks louder than her lies. And most importantly, I have the truth. The truth doesn't always win, Margaret." "No," I agreed. "But it's the only weapon I have that she can't steal." That afternoon, I did something I'd been avoiding. I went to Emma's preschool. Not to pick her up, that wasn't my right anymore, but to speak with her teacher, Mrs. Chen. I'd volunteered in the classroom twice a month for the past year, reading stories and helping with art projects. Mrs. Chen knew me, knew Emma, knew our relationship. "Mrs. Hill." She was surprised but pleased to see me. "Emma's been asking about you. She said you moved away." "Not far," I assured her. "Just into my own apartment. Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Have you noticed any changes in Emma lately? Any signs of stress or anxiety?" Her expression grew thoughtful. "Actually, yes. She's been more clingy, less willing to participate in group activities, and she's been saying some concerning things." "Like what?" "Like that she has to be very quiet at home because Grandma needs rest, and that Grandma forgets things and might hurt herself. She said it very matter-of-factly, like she'd been told this many times." Mrs. Chen paused. "Mrs. Hill, I've worked with you enough to know that you're one of the sharpest people I've ever met. These things Emma's saying, they don't match the woman I know." "They're not supposed to," I said quietly. "Mrs. Chen, I may need you to write down what you've observed. About Emma's statements, about our interactions in the classroom. Would you be willing to do that?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course." "Mrs. Hill, if someone is hurting that little girl by manipulating her understanding of reality, that's emotional abuse. I'm a mandated reporter. I need to document this anyway." Another piece falling into place. Another witness to the truth. I thanked her and left, feeling the weight of the week settling into my bones, but also feeling something else. The solid foundation of a case being built, brick by evidentiary brick. By Wednesday, the wheels were in motion. The police had opened an investigation into the credit card fraud. Adult Protective Services had interviewed me and documented the attempted financial exploitation. Tom had sent the cease and desist letters. And I'd done one more thing. I'd contacted the mothers from Amanda's mommy group, the ones who'd laughed at her jokes about me being a free babysitter. I'd invited them to coffee, one by one, and I'd told them my story. Not with anger, not with tears, but with calm documentation of what had happened. Some believed me immediately, others were skeptical. But I didn't need them all to believe me. I just needed them to start questioning, to start watching, to start seeing the cracks in Amanda's perfect facade. Because here's what I'd learned in 43 years of teaching. The truth has a way of spreading, especially when you plant it in fertile ground. By Thursday, a week after Thanksgiving, The first crack appeared. Jacob called, not to apologize, not to check on me, but to ask a question that told me everything I needed to know. "Mum, did you make a payment on my credit card last month?" "No," I said truthfully. "Why?" "There's a charge here I don't recognize." Actually, several charges. Amanda said you must have used the card accidentally, that you've been confused about finances lately. And there it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. "Jacob," I said, my voice steady, "I haven't used your credit card. I haven't been confused. But someone has been using cards in our family, cards they shouldn't have access to. Check your other statements. Check the account under your father's name that was supposed to be closed. And ask yourself, who benefits from you believing I'm incompetent?" Silence. Long, heavy silence. Then, "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you should look at your finances very carefully, and you should ask yourself why your wife has been so interested in having me declared mentally unfit. What she gains from that. What she's been hiding." Another pause. "I need to go." "Jacob," I said, "I love you. I've always loved you, and I'm trying to protect you, even if you can't see it yet. But I won't let her destroy me to cover her own crimes. Not anymore." He hung up. I sat there holding the phone, wondering if I'd just lost my son forever, or if I'd planted the seed that would finally help him see the truth. Either way, I'd done what I needed to do. The rest was up to him. That night, alone in my apartment, I made myself dinner. A simple pasta with tomatoes and basil from the windowsill garden I'd started. And I thought about David, about how he'd fought through his disability, refusing to let the accident define him, about how he'd taught me that survival wasn't about avoiding pain, but about walking through it with your eyes open, about how he'd loved me not because I was perfect, but because I was real. "I'm being real now," I whispered to his memory. "I'm fighting back. I hope you'd be proud." The wind rattled my window, and somewhere in the building I heard the faint sound of a television, voices laughing at some sitcom. Normal sounds, human sounds. The sounds of life continuing despite everything. And I realized that's what I was doing, continuing, but on my own terms. Not as the discarded mother, but as a woman who'd decided that her story wasn't over yet. It was just beginning a new chapter, one where I held the pen. The unraveling began not with a bang, but with a spreadsheet. Jacob called me on Friday morning, and I could hear it in his voice, the tremor of a man whose foundation was cracking beneath him. "Mom, I need to see you. We need to talk." "I'm at Maplewood Apartments," I said calmly. "Unit 3B. You know where it is." He arrived within the hour, looking like he hadn't slept. His hair was uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty. Not the confident man who'd stood by while his wife dismissed me, but the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort I always freely gave. "I looked at the statements," he said, without preamble, standing in my doorway like he wasn't sure he deserved to come in. All of them. The credit cards, the bank accounts, Dad's old card that was supposed to be closed. "Mum, there's $53,000 in charges I never made, purchases I never authorized. And the signatures," his voice broke, "they're not mine. Some of them are yours. But I know you didn't make them because I checked the dates. And you were teaching that adult literacy class across town when these purchases were made." I stepped aside, letting him enter. "Sit down, Jacob." He sank into my modest couch, the one I'd bought from a second-hand store for $200, and he looked so lost that my heart ached despite everything. This was still my son, still the boy I'd raised, still the man I'd hoped would become someone better than this moment. It's been Amanda, he whispered. All this time she's been stealing from us, from you, from Dad's memory. He looked up at me with eyes full of devastation. And the journal, Mum. I found the journal where she documented your incidents. I compared the dates to your planner, the one you've kept religiously for 40 years. None of it matches. None of it was real. I know, I said gently. You knew? How long have you known? About 6 months, since I found the first fraudulent charges on your father's card. He stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. 6 months. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with truth. 6 months ago, when you were standing by watching her push me into corners, dismiss my concerns, treat me like a burden, would you have believed your paranoid, declining mother over your perfect wife? The silence was answer enough. I had to build a case, I continued, sitting across from him. I had to document everything, gather evidence, create a record that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Because I knew that when this came out, she would make one last attempt to paint me as the villain. And I needed to be unassailable. What have you done? He asked. And it wasn't accusation. It was wonder. What I should have done the moment she taped that note to my suitcase. I fought back. I retrieved the folder I'd kept on my coffee table, the one I'd been waiting to show him. I filed police reports for identity theft and fraud. I filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services for attempted financial exploitation. I had the forged power of attorney she created, documented, and nullified. I contacted every credit card company and bank involved, and I made sure that everyone who needs to know the truth, your daughter's teacher, our family lawyer, our pastor, has documentation of what really happened. Jacob's hands were shaking as he took the folder. For the next half hour, he read in silence, his face growing paler with each page. The evidence of Amanda's crimes was damning, not because I'd exaggerated anything, but because the truth, laid bare in black and white, was more devastating than any accusation could be. The nursing homes, he whispered, holding up the brochures. She was really going to have me committed, yes. With the forged power of attorney and her fake journal documenting my incompetence, she could have had me locked away in a memory care facility. And once I was there, she would have had access to everything, my house, my retirement funds, my savings, everything your father and I built would have become hers. To cover her debts. His voice was hollow. To pay for the lifestyle she wanted us to have, the one I could never quite afford. Jesus Christ, Mum. She was going to throw you away like garbage to cover up her own crimes. Yes. He looked at me with something like awe. How are you so calm? How are you not screaming, not crying, not... Because I spent 3 years being the person she told everyone I was. Quiet, forgettable, declining. I played the role while I gathered my evidence. And now? I leaned forward. Now I'm the person I've always been. A teacher who believes in consequences. A mother who protects her family, even when they can't see the danger. And a woman who refuses to be erased. The tears came then, streaming down his face with a force that shook his shoulders. I should have protected you. I should have seen what was happening. I should have been the son you deserved, instead of the coward I became. I wanted to comfort him. Every maternal instinct screamed at me to wrap him in my arms and tell him it was okay, that I forgave him, that we could move past this. But that would have been a lie. and I'd spent too long living in other people's lies to add my own. You weren't a coward, Jacob. You were complicit. There's a difference, and you need to understand that. My voice was gentle but firm, the same tone I'd used with students who needed to face hard truths about themselves. You saw what she was doing. Maybe not the fraud, but the cruelty, the dismissal, the systematic erasure of your own mother. And you chose her comfort over my dignity. You chose silence over speaking up. That wasn't weakness. That was a choice. I know. The words were barely audible. God help me. I know. So what are you going to do about it? He wiped his face with the back of his hand, and I saw something shift in his expression. A hardening, a resolution. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to divorce her. I'm going to fight for full custody of Emma. I'm going to make sure she pays for what she's done. To you, to us, to Dad's memory. No, I said, surprising him. You're going to let the law handle Amanda. You're going to cooperate with the police investigation, provide evidence, testify if needed. But this isn't about revenge, Jacob. This is about protection. You're going to protect your daughter from growing up thinking that manipulation and cruelty are normal. You're going to protect yourself from being destroyed by someone else's greed. And I paused. You're going to rebuild trust with me one day at a time, understanding that it may take years and that I may never fully forgive you. Can you accept that? He met my eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw the man I'd hoped he'd become. Yes, I can accept that. The explosion came that afternoon. Amanda must have sensed something was wrong. Maybe Jacob's questions about the finances, maybe the sudden coldness in his voice, maybe just the instinct of someone whose house of cards was collapsing. She showed up at Maplewood Apartments at 3 p.m., pounding on my door with a fury I'd never seen from her before. "You bitch!" she screamed, loud enough that my neighbors opened their doors. "You vindictive, jealous, miserable old bitch! You turned my husband against me. You destroyed my marriage." I opened the door calmly, phone already in my hand, already recording. "Amanda, you need to leave. This is private property, and you're not welcome here." "I'm not welcome. I'm not welcome." She was practically spitting. "You're the one who destroyed everything. You poisoned Jacob's mind with your lies, your fake evidence, your pathetic attempt to make yourself the victim." "The evidence isn't fake," I said evenly. "The $53,000 in fraudulent charges aren't fake. The forged power of attorney isn't fake. Your journal documenting incidents that never happened isn't fake. Those are all real, Amanda. The only fake thing here is the life you've been pretending to live." Her face contorted with rage. A small crowd had gathered in the hallway now, my neighbors, drawn by the commotion. Sandra from the library had come to drop off some books and stood frozen, witnessing everything. "You can't prove anything," Amanda shrieked. "Actually, I can. I have bank statements, credit card records, security footage from stores where purchases were made with forged signatures. I have testimony from your daughter's teacher about the lies you told her. I have witnesses who documented my competence while you were claiming I was declining. I have everything, Amanda. The only thing I don't have is mercy. Jacob will forgive me. He loves me. We have a child together." "Jacob has already filed for divorce," I said, watching her face drain of colour. "The papers will be served tomorrow. And he's seeking full custody of Emma based on your documented emotional manipulation of a child and your pattern of fraud and deception. You can't take my daughter from me. I'm not taking anything. You gave her away the moment you decided that your greed was more important than her well-being. You taught her to fear and distrust her own grandmother. You used her as a weapon in your scheme to steal from us. That's not love, Amanda. That's abuse. She lunged at me then, and if Sandra hadn't stepped between us, I don't know what would have happened. But the movement was enough. Enough for my phone to capture. Enough for witnesses to see. Enough to add assault to the list of charges that would be filed against her. You're going to regret this, Amanda hissed, being held back by two of my neighbors who'd stepped forward to help. You're going to die alone, forgotten, with no one who cares about you. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but pity. I'd rather die alone with my dignity intact than live surrounded by people who see me as nothing but a resource to exploit. Goodbye, Amanda. The police arrived 10 minutes later. I gave them the recording, added it to the evidence file. Amanda was escorted away, still screaming threats, still insisting she'd done nothing wrong. As I watched her go, I felt the weight of 3 years lifting from my shoulders. The legal proceedings took months. The divorce was brutal, but swift. Once Jacob's lawyer presented the evidence of fraud, Amanda's attorney advised her to settle quickly and quietly to avoid criminal prosecution. She got supervised visitation with Emma, nothing more. The credit card companies pursued their own cases against her. The district attorney filed charges for identity theft, fraud, and forgery. But the real reckoning happened not in courtrooms, but in quiet moments. Jacob came by every week, bringing Emma, trying to rebuild what had been broken. At first, it was awkward. What do you say to the son who let you be discarded, to the granddaughter who'd been taught to fear you? But slowly, painfully, we found our way back to each other. Emma was the key. At 4 years old, she was resilient in ways adults never are. Once freed from Amanda's poisonous influence, she began to remember the grandmother who'd read her stories and sang her lullabies. "Grandma," she said one afternoon, crawling into my lap as we sat in my small living room. "Mommy said you forgot things, but you didn't forget me, did you?" "Never," I whispered, holding her close. "I could never forget you." Jacob watched us with tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything." "I know," I said. And I did. But sorry wasn't magic. It couldn't undo the damage, couldn't erase the betrayal. It was just a word, a starting point. The real work would be in the years ahead, in the slow rebuilding of trust, in Jacob proving through actions rather than words that he understood what he'd done. 3 months after Amanda left, I did something I'd been planning since the day I moved into Maplewood. I started teaching again. Not at a school. I was done with institutions and their politics. But here, in the community room of my apartment building. I offered free classes in writing, literature, anything anyone wanted to learn. My students were a motley crew, elderly immigrants working on their English, young single mothers trying to get their GEDs, teenagers who'd dropped out of school out and wanted a second chance. One evening, as I was helping a woman from Somalia understand the metaphor in a Langston Hughes poem, I looked around the room and realized something profound. This was my legacy. Not the house I'd built and nearly lost, not the money I'd saved and almost had stolen, but this, the sharing of knowledge, the empowerment of others, the quiet revolution of education. Mrs. Chen, Emma's teacher, attended some of my classes. So did Father Michael. So did several mothers from Amanda's old mommy group, the ones who'd laughed at her jokes about me, but later approached me with quiet apologies. The community I'd thought I'd lost by leaving Jacob's house was actually larger than ever, built not on proximity, but on respect. 6 months after the confrontation, I received a letter. Not from Amanda. She'd vanished after the legal proceedings, moving back to her parents' home in another state, but from a woman I didn't know. Her name was Patricia, and she wrote to tell me that she'd seen my story on a local news segment about elder fraud. "I'm 68," she wrote, "and my son-in-law has been pressuring me to sign over my house to him and my daughter for tax purposes. Your story gave me the courage to say no, to consult a lawyer, to protect myself. You saved me from making a terrible mistake. Thank you for being brave enough to fight back." I pinned that letter to my refrigerator, next to Emma's drawings and Jacob's tentative notes of apology and rebuilding. It reminded me that my story wasn't just about me. It was about every person who'd been told they were too old, too forgetful, too much of a burden to matter. It was about refusing to accept the narrative others tried to write for you. 1 year later, on Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner in my small apartment. It wasn't fancy. I couldn't fit a huge table, couldn't serve 12 courses. But Jacob was there with Emma. Sandra from the library came. Father Michael said grace. Mrs. Chen brought homemade dumplings. And a half-dozen of my students showed up, bringing dishes from their home countries, sharing stories and laughter. As I looked around my crowded living room, I thought about that night a year ago when I'd stood on a porch holding a suitcase, reading a note that tried to reduce me to nothing. I thought about how close I'd come to accepting that version of myself. The burden, the inconvenience, the woman who existed only to serve others until she could be quietly discarded. But I hadn't accepted it. I'd fought back, not with anger or revenge, but with something more powerful: the truth. And in doing so, I discovered something Amanda could never understand. You can take away someone's house, their belongings, their place in a family structure. But you can't take away their dignity unless they give it to you. And I had never, would never, give mine away again. They say that growing old means becoming invisible, that society stops seeing you as relevant once your hair goes grey and your hands start to shake. For a long time, I believed that. I believed that my value was tied to what I could give, what I could sacrifice, how useful I could be to others. I thought love meant enduring mistreatment silently, that family meant accepting cruelty as the price of belonging. I was wrong. The truth I learned, standing in my own apartment with my found family gathered around me, is that invisibility is not something that happens to you. It's something you accept. Amanda tried to make me invisible, tried to erase me from my own story, but she failed because I refused to disappear. I documented, I planned, I fought back with the only weapons I had: evidence, truth, and the unshakable belief that I deserved better. Sometimes survival isn't about fighting louder. It's about holding your ground until the lies collapse on their own. It's about understanding that patience isn't weakness, that strategic silence isn't the same as defeat. It's about knowing when to gather your strength and when to strike, when to forgive and when to walk away. I don't know if Jacob and I will ever fully heal what was broken between us. Some cracks are too deep to mend completely. But we're trying, and that's something. Emma is thriving, free from the toxic environment Amanda created. And me? I'm teaching again, writing again, living again. Not as someone's burden or someone's victim, but as myself. If you're reading this and you see yourself in my story, if you're the person being pushed aside, dismissed, told you're too much or not enough, please hear me. You are not invisible. You are not a burden. You are not done yet. Your story isn't over. Sometimes the most radical act of resistance is simply refusing to accept the ending someone else tries to write for you. Stand your ground. Document everything. Trust the truth. And never, ever give away your dignity, no matter who asks for it. If your own family pushed you out after everything you sacrificed, would you fight back or would you walk away? Would you accept their version of who you are, or would you reclaim your own story? I want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. How many others have lived through their own version of what I survived? Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been told they're invisible, someone who's forgotten their own strength. And if you're that person, if you're standing where I stood a year ago, holding your metaphorical suitcase and wondering if you have the courage to fight back, let me tell you something. You do. You have more strength than you know, more worth than they'll ever acknowledge, and more future than they want you to believe. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that age is power, that wisdom is earned through survival, that the truth always deserves to be told. Because I'm not done sharing my story. I'm not done teaching. And I'm not done reminding the world that we, the invisible ones, the dismissed ones, the underestimated ones, are still here, still standing, still fighting, and we're not going anywhere.